Good evening. Now, good evening, everyone. It's not on.
It's not on.
It's on. Can you hear me? It's on?
Yes.
Okay.
It's
Fine. I talk loud anyway. It is 5:30. It's time to begin our special board meeting. The first thing that we always do is offer public comments. Are there any public comments? There being none, I'll call this meeting to order. Before the roll call of members, we need to adjust the wording on 5.4. Dr. Paluski, can you?
Yes, ma'am. Madam President, members of our Board of Education, the superintendent recommends just to amend item 5.4 to be the synergistic energy contract renewal.
Do I have a motion to make that change on the agenda?
Madam President, I move that we correct the wording on the synergistic contract.
Second.
It has been properly moved and second that we change the wording that's on the agenda that's went out to the public for 5.4 to contract renewal. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It has been approved.
This ain't
Now let's
on.
back up to roll call of members.
It ain't on. Can you hear me?
Here.
It's not on. Present. It's not on.
Here. Here.
Oh, yes.
Here.
Okay.
We have a lot to cover in executive session, so I'm going to read the whole entire content of it so that the public will know what we're going into executive session for. Executive closed session per North Florida School District Policy 1.14A stating that private or closed discussions by the board may occur as part of a regular or special board meeting. Executive sessions may be held only for the purpose of considering employment, appointment, promotion, demotion, disciplining, or resignation of an employee, or to discuss matters of pupil punishment if requested by the parent or legal guardian. No resolution or agreement or motion considered in the executive session shall be legally binding unless the board reconvenes in public session and presents the item for a vote of the membership. Further, Arkansas Code Title 25, Chapter 19, Section 106(2)C states, the specific purpose of the executive session shall be announced in public before going into executive session. Please join me to discuss employment, appointment, promotion, demotion, and disciplining and resignation of an employee and student pupil punishment. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Test. Okay. Come on. Test. Test.
We are back in session. We're down to action items, new business, 5.1, employment of personnel.
Madam President, members of our Board of Education, the superintendent recommends the employment of personnel as discussed in executive closed session.
Madam Chair, I so move that we accept the recommendation of the superintendent for the licensed personnel recognition, retirement, and termination, as well as the classified resignation, termination, and normal renewal.
Second.
It has been properly moved and second that we accept the employment of personnel presented by Dr. Paluski. Being that it is employment of personnel, there can be no discussion, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It has been adopted. Legal transfers.
Madam President, members of our Board of Education, the superintendent recommends 5.2, the legal transfer.
Madam President,
Yes, ma'am.
I so move that we accept the legal transfer that Dr. Paluski suggests.
Second.
It has been properly moved and second that we accept the legal transfer presented. Are there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's been adopted. 5.3, due process settle agreement.
Madam President, members of our Board of Education, the superintendent recommends action item 5.3, a due process settlement agreement.
Madam President,
Yes, ma'am.
I so move that we accept the due process settlement agreement.
Second.
It has been properly moved and second that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for the approval of the due process settlement agreement as discussed in closed session. We cannot discuss it in open session, so therefore, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It has been passed. We're down to 5.4, the contract renewal.
Madam President, members of our Board of Education, the superintendent recommends action item 5.4, the synergistic contract renewal.
Madam President,
Yes, ma'am.
I so move that, I can't make this motion, I'm voting against it. You
Oh,
do.
that's right.
This
I
is my
so
notebook.
move that the energy program, the best awards and overall report on program and contract, and agreeable to the contract issued to the board.
Second.
It has been properly second. The motion has been made. It's been properly second that we accept the contract renewal presented from Synergistic. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No,
Roll call.
Any opposed? No. Roll call, Ms. Colquitt.
Dr. Redis,
Yes.
Mrs. Williams,
Yes.
Ms. Carson West,
Yes.
Mrs. Temple,
Yes.
Mrs. Walker,
nope.
Mrs. McQueen,
Yes.
Mr. Stitcher.
Yes.
The ayes have it. It's been adopted. 5.5, facilities use request.
Madam President, members of our Board of Education, the superintendent recommends that a facility use request as presented in open session.
Madam President, I so move that we accept the facilities used approved by the superintendent.
Second.
It has been moved and properly second that we accept the facilities use request presented. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It has been adopted. I will entertain a motion to move to adjourn and go into workshop.
Madam President,
Yes, ma'am.
I so move that we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Now.
We are now in workshop. The first thing on our agenda is 1.1, Board Docs, Board Policy Management System, which will be presented by Dr. Paluski and Ms. Rhonda Colquitt.
Oh,
You ain't snap your finger, did
thank you.
you? Good color.
Ready?
Okay, y'all got your questions ready?
Oh, we gotta wait on her computer.
Are you ready? Okay. Madam President, members of our Board of Education, for the record, my name is Greg Paluski, the proud superintendent of the North Little Rock School District, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ms. Rhonda Colquitt, who's my executive assistant, right hand, left hand, and then some. We're going to present to you this evening. We're really not going to go through this formal presentation, but more of a show and tell. And that is about, as we've transitioned July 1, we moved to the Board Docs platform, which has made everything more transparent, more electronic. And I think that's been a really good thing for our public, for our board, our ease of use. And so the next part of this is really about our board policies. And I'm going to have Ms. Colquitt currently go to where our board policies are, so we can kind of show you and show the public some of the challenges we currently face with how our current policies are organized on our website. You want to pull up the website? Yeah, I know. Sorry about the little technical glitch.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm having them too over here, just.
So this is the website.
Yeah, so can you go back out one more, just to show them where we are? Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, go right to Bora. So what she's doing, and if she'll go to show you where under the Board of Education tab, and you'll see on the right-hand side where our currently board policies are. And this is how they're currently organized. So if you look at the licensed personnel, we'll just kind of pull this one up because it's a large one, as you all know. This is a 152-page document. This is one stagnant document, as you can see. Very difficult to navigate. If you're looking for a policy, you can't search this. It's just in one large PDF. And there's numerous policies that are here. If Ms. Colquitt goes back, so that's one issue that we currently found, is just be able to navigate, to make it ease of use for Board of Education members, for employees. If Ms. Colquitt goes out, she's going to go in section 3, which is curriculum. If she goes back out one more, she's going to go to tab 3, section 4. Oh, curriculum instruction, excuse me, section 5. So if you just kind of glance at this and you see the numbering system 5.1, if you scroll down, and I want to point this out, that, stop right there. You'll see where it stops at 5.29. Now we have NLR1, NLR2, NLR3. Our numbering system's a little bit all over the place. So one of the things that we're proposing with Board Docs that we have the ability to do is house all of our policies, that they'll be able to be searchable. But one of the things that Ms. Colquitt has worked on is a new numbering system that puts everything numerically in order. So what she's going to pull up now is she's going to show you, this is not live. It is within Board Docs, but she's going to show you what it's going to look like, what the tab is going to look like. And while she's pulling it up, I just want to brag on Ms. Colquitt. She has taken this project on literally by herself. She has navigated the implementation of Board Docs as long as with Ms. Pat as a backup, Ms. Pat 1 and Ms. Camper. And I think it's been a very seamless transition moving to Board Docs in July 1 with not very many glitches. And so I applaud her for her leadership. And now she's going to log in as her editing rights. Now you're going to see up at the top, you see where it says policies. Now this is not on, this is not access to the public yet, and this is what Ms. Colquitt's been working on. And then what you're going to see is now the ability within Board Docs. All of the policies are there. We'll pick on license, which is section 3. And now you see they're all there. You'd be able to just click on, she can pick any one of those and click on it. And then now you have the policy that's right there in front of you. Very easy. There's a search button up at the top. You could search in anything, and it will absolutely go and search for any policy that has that number in it. So again, making it transparency. Go ahead, Yep, that's a good example. She just typed in salary, and then you're going to get every policy that has salary related to it. Since Ms. Colquitt has been working diligently on this, you can imagine we have a lot of policies. And she's done a great job painstakingly working with board docs to put all of our policies in this format. Here's what's also interesting about the platform. We have the ability, when we update a policy or we revise a policy, it has the functionality. If we were going to revise this policy on salary schedules as an example, we could type in new language in red and with a strike through, and that could be immediately for the public to see and add comment on of what we're proposing in a change. And remember, we talked about getting to a point of a proposed policy where we have 30 days. We want to hear from the community, and that can be in real time as well. And so what we're going to come back to at a later board meeting is asking for your approval of a new numeric numbering system. Since then, we've worked with the LPPC. We've met with them on this as well, and the CPPC. They've asked to look at all of the policies. Not that they didn't trust us, but they wanted to just verify our work and make sure that the policies that they had set forth are the same policies that we have transferred over. And we welcome anyone to be able to look at our work. Ms. Colquitt is in that process as well. LPPC is looking at all this. The CPPC also has this. And they're looking at the policies to make sure that what is in writing is going to be electronic. And it's also my understanding, because it'll be a change in the policy when we change the number, that both the LPPC and CPPC will vote on the new numbering system before we bring it to you for your final approval. Ms. Colquitt deserves a lot of credit. I mean, if you just look here very quickly, there's a lot of detail, and I applaud her leadership of not only migrating us to board docs, but she is literally an expert on it, and I just applaud her, and I thank her for all the hard work that she's done to be able to move this in our school district.
Can I?
Thank you, Ms. Colquitt.
Thank you.
You get a candy bar.
Are there any
Madam President?
questions?
I do have a question down here. I was trying to search to where it says board travel, but I'm not finding anything.
I can search it if that's what you're asking me to do.
I have a follow-up question and a
Okay.
reason.
Which I believe it would be in section 1 under governance.
That would be under governance.
Expense reimbursement, possibly.
But exactly,
Is it for board members being reimbursed for travel?
No,
too? Okay.
just basically my question is, who's eligible to attend meetings? This is, I think, a good example that there are some meetings that I think it'd be very appropriate for Ms. Colquitt to attend.
Sure.
I mean, if she puts together all of our travel arrangements. And also I say that because I know in New Orleans, but I'm not sure it was one other meeting. I met at least 2 people, and I asked them what they did. Were they board members? And they said, no, I work for the board.
Yeah.
So other school districts, other states allow,
Oh, absolutely.
and I guess encourage that. So,
Absolutely.
and there'll be times when you can't attend because you have conflicts. But if it's in there that it's only board members and superintendent, then we may need to revisit that if that's something that you are in favor of.
Absolutely. Ms. Colquitt and I talk very often, and she is welcome to go to any professional development.
So that's already allowed in our rules.
Well, she's a district employee. Our employees are allowed to go to professional development, and I highly encourage her to go. In fact, we've talked about that, building capacity. She's been inundated with board docs, but yes, I mean she pseudo serves the office of the superintendent, and then she serves you as the board. So I highly encourage any professional development for her to attend.
Thank you.
Sure.
And she does a wonderful job. She spoils us.
And thank you
Yes,
for
she
these
does.
seats, Ms. Colquitt.
Yes.
Yes,
spoils us.
Ms. Colquitt, thank you for the early Christmas surprise.
Yes.
you're welcome.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Question, Kitty.
Let me see. Do I have? No, I don't have anything.
So, and I'll just kind of wrap it up with this, where we envision going forward once we get LPPC support, come back to you, and then once you approve the numbering system, this will go live, and then it'll be there for the public to search and all of that. The next thing, and Dr. Redis, in our one-on-ones that we've gone over this as well, is what we want to be able to do is, what we also have, and this is a really good example, if you look up here, we want to create a database of our policies. You'll see this one was adopted April 22nd, 2022, last revised June 15th, 2027. We want to create a catalog in which we can look at our board policies by the last date and year in which they were adopted. We have some policies that were adopted in the 80s.
Yes.
And so that will then start to set our priorities in a board revision policy calendar so we can start bringing you more policies. We've also identified since our arrival of policies in some cases where we don't have, where we have some gaps. So this really starts the framework of more work which is in your domain as policy development, revision, adoption, and approval.
Yes, just a comment. She had a great plan to put forms in the policy too, and you see it with the F.
Yes.
Number in the F means a form.
Correct. Thank you for pointing that out. So will go away all the NLRs. They're now in a numbering system, but that is a good point. If it has an F, it does have a form that is attached to it, which makes it easy to look at. So.
What would we do without you, Ms. Colquitt?
Don't want to know.
Fall by the wayside and be hungry.
You don't have anything to say?
I will say I do appreciate Dr. Paluski's support, the time that he has given me to dedicate to this project. It has been a huge undertaking. It is still a work in progress. And just the collaboration that we've had with taking this to the committees, the CPPC and the LPPC, they did have questions, and we did try to answer, to the best of my knowledge. One thing that they were requesting is access to the system. However, at this time, that is not an option, but we did, or I did, print the policies as guided by Dr. Paluski. The information, as he stated, has gone forth to both of those committees. We're just looking forward to getting that information back from them so we can get final approval on this.
Very well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Colquitt.
Thank you, sir.
We are down to 1.2, the Governance Core Professional Development. Mr. Quinn.
Hi.
Mr. Quinn.
I am half deaf, so anything we can do to get the mics working, I'll be able to hear the board.
Mr. Clean.
So, we know that you have a life, and you have jobs, and you're on the school board, you have family birthdays. So when we ask you to gather on a Saturday, that's a sacrifice. So we have sort of played with the idea of doing this tonight during a board meeting. And, I'm always going to be totally honest. We're going to go 30 minutes, and if you're bored or not into it, we'll probably wrap then, or then we'll maybe do 45 if you feel like we're moving along. So, but that is sort of the structure. And thank you for having me here. I continue to really enjoy the work with the district. And I will start, before we talk about the book, I think you all should be pretty proud about some things happening in this community right now. I think the culture of the board meetings has changed. I think you are doing things and making a difference, and I think people are noticing. Diane Zook spent years on the State Board of Education. Her husband is Randy Zook, who runs the State Chamber of Commerce. They are very visible and influential, and I got out of bed one Saturday morning and I'm having my coffee and flipping through Twitter, which drives my wife crazy. Why don't you talk to me instead of staring at Twitter? But there on a Saturday morning on Twitter is Diane Zook saying, and I'll try to do it verbatim, oh wow, look at North Little Rock actually being transparent with their numbers and actually being willing to put out there on the table where they are today, where they want to be in 2 years, where they want to be in 5 years. So a couple of lessons. People are noticing, and good for you for doing that, because there are many districts in this state who don't do that. So transparency, honesty, I think people are noticing, and it's kind of cool. The other thing, what's sitting over there tonight, nice quiet night in here, looking at a very routine school board meeting. You know, the things school boards really do, they make decisions about the cafeteria and cutting the grass, and they make decisions about board docs. And we live in a world that seems to have forgotten that, and a world that thinks everything school boards do is about social issues, which isn't true at all. You're sitting here talking about the decimal numbering system on board docs. That's what school boards in America do, and we seem to, as a society, to a certain extent, we've forgotten that. So I like this book. I felt like I was a kid again when the superintendent gave it to me and said, go home and do your homework. So I went home. The thing about this book I like, you can take a yellow highlighter and read it really closely, or they do a really nice job in here of periodically putting like checklist, so you can kind of skim it very effectively too. So the slide deck I'm going to use tonight is, let me start the clock. Let me start my 30-minute clock. The slide deck I built myself because I was kind of into the book, and the more I read it, I wanted to structure it so it didn't look like a sort of a hybrid slide deck, and I wanted to sort of kind of keep it interesting. Governance, school board governance can mean a lot of different things. I think the public thinks you deal with policy all the time, but it is never that simple. Governance is more than policy. It's about doing the work in a respectful manner. Oversight and stewardship of the superintendent and staff. The other thing that's very clear when you read this book, you hire one person, he hires thousands. And that is, if there's probably rule one for a school board, I think that might be rule one. And the other thing I think you've done successfully is you have shifted gears in your culture, that you're not calling the superintendent a lot saying, I really think this person would make a great third grade teacher. You are letting the superintendent do what you are paying him to do and what you hired him to do. And I think in terms of governance, that's really important. And I think, again, people are noticing. Governance, it's a funny word. It's the name of the book. It's not a word you see a lot, but it's the connection between communities and professionals, between policy and what you actually do every day. And it's both long-term and it's tactical and short-term. As we go through the slides, I don't want to bore you, so jump in. We're going to try to keep this very conversational as we move along. In this book, sort of, as I read it, I thought these were the 7 work areas. Not exactly what the chapters are called, but I try to move language into sort of like cleaner language. Moral imperative, the governance mindset, the superintendent governance mindset. And then when I read the book, this was the chapter I went, oh, wow, that's something we don't think much about at all. And I don't mean we, you, this board. I mean boards in general, which is how do you bring on new board members? Probably the most overlooked piece of what you do and how things should be done are, and I think, that, again, this is true across all boards or most boards, is the sort of you're new and you get dumped in that seat and you try to figure out what's going on. And the thing about being on a school board, I find there's an arc. Like there'll be an issue in the community that people start to talk about. And then they'll say to you, why don't we do something about that? And then the issue starts to escalate. And then it's up here where you say to the superintendent, I'd like to see that on the agenda. And your staff brings you a recommendation and your superintendent is focused on it. And then maybe you vote on it and it kind of tails off and goes away. And when you're new, you come in the middle of that arc on a whole bunch of issues. And you try to say, well, okay, what is my role here? What are we doing here? What is, and there's a million questions. And when you're a new board member and reading at grade level or average ACT, and that part of you wants to raise your hand and ask a lot of what I call new guy questions, But sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So how you bring on new board members, I think, really matters. Coherent board management, your board culture, what is the job and what do you need to do the job. Tonight, again, the board docs conversation was a great example. I was on a board that used board docs, and the first couple of meetings I was like, huh? But once you get the hang of it and really start to use it, during a meeting, you can have all aspects of that issue, and once you get the hang of clicking around, it really is an effective tool. So again, we're living in this world. The Bentonville School Board next Tuesday is electing 5 members on one night. Now think about that. 1 is a person seeking re-election, I know. 4 are going to be guaranteed new members. The U.S. Census Bureau does the 2010, the 2020, and then if your population grows 10% across the board in different districts, you have to do re-election in that district. If you're a fast-growing area, you wake up and you've got 5 elections on one night. Now, think about that, new person orientation issues. People are paying attention because it's so unusual. But for the most part, what you do here, a lot of people don't pay attention to. You're dealing with stress and anxiety among students, the ever-growing disparity between rich and poor. You have students from all walks of life. That is a complex thing that as a society, we don't talk a lot about that. I'm a big believer that we live in a society that sort of forgets some kids have wireless at home, they have a new laptop, they have a parent with a credit card who can pay for them to take the ACT. They have parents who may or may not have been to college who would encourage them to, hey, you can take the ACT 4 times because we can afford that. And oh, by the way, if you want to spend $65 to buy the study guide, you have all that. To over here, a kid who really has none of that support. And I think, as a former school board member, the thing that changed our whole world was COVID, where I think a lot of people finally went, huh, when you talk about what matters in education, well, how about we start with wireless? And then once we're done talking about wireless, let's talk about, does the family have a laptop? And those are fundamental, real issues that you as board members probably drive home. So I used to drive home from board meetings kind of recapping the night in my head. What did we do? What did I say? What did I really think of that issue? Did I pull my punches? I should have been stronger. But one thing I would often drive home thinking about was the disparity between families with resources and families without. And that was a theme in my head driving home. So again, I think when we look at this list, that disparity between rich and poor is important. Teacher pay, teacher recruitment. Look, every district right now can't find enough bus drivers. That's not your fault. That's society right now. You can't find. And I was watching someone have a board meeting the other night, and people were complaining. Well, okay, what I learned in 6 years on a board, let's maybe blame you for what this board deserves to be blamed for, but there's a lot of societal stuff that you can't fix and you don't have a magic wand. And most boards have bumped what you're paying bus drivers, you've upped how you're recruiting bus drivers. That's just part of life right now. So what you pay and how you recruit keeps getting more complex. Digital platforms, more information than ever. Some of it's crazy, some of it's not. I mean, people say things online about the district that simply aren't true, or they'll see something about a school district in Baltimore where something really bad happened, and they think, oh, well, that must be going on here too. But it's really not going on here, but they see what's happening nationally, and they want to assume that that's happening here too. And then stagnant enrollment is an issue. You have a superintendent who has a digital flip chart thing in his waiting area that has today's population, and then if that's not enough, he has a little chart on his wall that has a handwritten what the population is today. That's big. Sometimes in life you see a superintendent who has kind of a blank, clear desk, and then you see a superintendent who has notes to himself that your population is up about 175 right now, and that does or does not count preschool, but the point is you've hired a guy who has a chart in his office. So that matters because enrollment matters. But I think these are the challenges that you as board members are thinking about. I love, this is where I started, you're honest, you're being transparent, you're saying to the community, we're going to try to fix this. We may not get there, but we're going to day to day try to fix this. This was a quote from the curriculum article a while ago. The achievement level in the district did not get here overnight, so there's no quick fix. Complex systems that have complex problems require complex solutions. No shot in the dark that everything's going to change in a year. I love that quote. That quote happened in this room at a board meeting. So good for you that you hired a guy to look at your curriculum and you let him be honest. And then in an open meeting, he said, took us a while to get here, going to take a while to fix this. Again, that's new. And that may sound simplistic, that I commend you for that, but that doesn't happen everywhere, okay? You have the fortitude to sort of say honestly, this is what we have to fix. Again, this clipping jumped out at me, and when we talk about governance, I thought this mattered. Again, the things I brag about North Little Rock, just today, I was in a conversation with someone bragging about how North Little Rock is changing. You navigated the pandemic, you rolled out a staff reorganization plan, you have given the superintendent a green light for a long-term strategic plan, which is a very involved document, broken into 5 real goals. We continue to work on it. I have a graphic artist involved now because I want to make it beautiful. I love presentation. And in January or February, when we go to the community, I'm working on a nice website with all these pieces that are coherently done, which is, again, is you as a board saying to the community, this matters to us, and we want to give you a real presentation. You have a high-functioning superintendent and a high-functioning deputy superintendent, fully engaged in the game. You hired them. They're doing what they were hired for. That matters. Security team and plan are in place. And I'm going to give you credit again. You approved the hiring of someone at a more senior staff level with a big city police department resume. And you did that pre-pandemic. And you did that in the midst of, you know, a fairly frequent number of police-related issues that you have to worry about. And you were ahead of yourselves on that. You were ahead of the curve on that. I think as board members, anytime you're ahead of the curve, good for you. You got a real security director in place, as opposed to someone sort of at a different level in the management team. I think that made a lot of sense, and your timing was great. When I first was involved with North Little Rock, you had a thing going on. You had a teacher who I believe had used up every single sick and personal day that she possibly conceivably could have used. And, you know, teachers have access to different pools of day, and I know we now talk about calling it personal leave or whatever. It's changed. The language has changed. And apparently this teacher had used up and used up and used up, and then she was terminated, but she was also ill, so she came to a board meeting and said, you're firing me because I'm sick. And you were like top of the 6 o'clock news for 3 days that week. I'm like, wow, okay. And then I said to someone, what's really happened? Well, okay, well, it's an HR issue. It's not we would not discriminate against anybody because they were sick. But tonight, nice quiet meeting. You're dealing with board docs, and you're having a real conversation. And so you've taken the anxiety level, I think, down. And anxiety level is a funny thing with school boards nowadays, but you've dialed it down. And I think, and finally, the community is noticing. Questions, thoughts? Okay.
I have one. I've been kind of wanting to say whoa to you since you started, but moral imperative. I did some looking up of some definitions so I could understand exactly what we're talking about with moral imperative.
I think moral imperative, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a bit of a complex, but I think it's the innate in your heart that you're going to do the right thing. And I remember after I had been on a board a while, and I think there's an arc to how long you've been on the board and how your head changes. I remember a certain point after a couple of years on the board, I remember thinking, wow, this is a big and serious deal. And I take being on the longer I was on a board, the more seriously I took being on a board. It's like I didn't get bored later. I didn't like dial out. I was like, this really matters. Because for all those things we just looked at, income disparity, quality of education, I think moral imperative is your working knowledge that this really matters. And while you may not all, get along or agree on every single issue, are you doing in your heart? And my moment was always driving home from that board meeting, like, okay, were you in the right place on that issue? Are you standing up for the right thing? And that was kind of my definition of moral imperative. I think most people which some notable kind of loud exceptions in the world we're living in, most people who want to be on the board, you could be home watching the World Series tonight, eating dinner in front of the TV after you've worked all day, but you're here, okay? So when you have the courage and the desire to be here, I think to a certain extent, most people who do this have that moral imperative that I'm going to do the right thing. Is that a decent answer?
Yes, I found that in several places when I was looking. And I also found, I think it came from the book, that I found it quoted online about our shared moral imperative, relentless commitment for the learning of all students with no exceptions. If you want to gear it towards that, for us, for school and for children. So yes, it's all those things. Do the right thing, that you're going to do the right thing.
Right. Which gets back to, and this sounds corny, but being on a school board is really not that different than some of the things your mother tried to teach you as early as kindergarten. The lessons that serve you well and make you a decent person through your entire life. And I also believe that people who gravitate to being on school boards tend to be decent people. But I'm a little idealistic because I'm an ex-school board member and I'm passionate about education discussions like this. So, but good point. I mean, I'm glad you called it out because I think in many ways that's at the core of all of this.
And I just wanted to add, Mr. Quinn, to that, and as we had our retreat, if you remember back in June, we started to kind of think about this, and in the back to school, and what we came up with that one Saturday afternoon was, as a community, all kids in North Little Rock will achieve. We said they will, not they can, not they may. They're going to have a high-quality teacher, have a high-quality leader, be in a safe and supportive learning environment. And I remember that Saturday when we took it a step further and said, we're not going to allow an achievement gap in the North Little Rock School District. And I remember our discussion about that as our driving moral imperative when we make decisions, or you make decisions collectively as a board. And I think it gets to who the board represents as a community and why we're here.
Mm-hmm.
I like moral imperative. I don't use that phrase, but I'm going to start using it.
I like that. I like that.
I like it.
Good. So I pulled quotes out for each chapter page here when I thought board members are elected to govern, not manage or teach, and to complicate matters even more, boards govern, not individual board members. I was surprised being on a board the number of people who would, I'm going to run for the board, I'm going to change the world. Okay, well, you're one vote, and it takes 4 to do anything. So it's in some ways it's the ultimate team exercise, right? Because it does take 4. And on a lot of nights, when it's pretty obvious, you're going to be a vote of 7. But I've also never believed that every board should vote 7-0 on everything. I mean, because you should disagree. You're intelligent, thoughtful human beings who have opted to come here and do this, and it would be grossly unrealistic to say you're going to agree on everything. I'll come to some specific case histories. I had the audacity as a board member to oppose a new football stadium. Yeah, I know. You want to be a board member in Arkansas and oppose a football stadium? Oh, and it got ugly fast. The superintendent, who became a good friend of mine, and I disagreed mightily on this issue. But we did that behind closed doors. Like, I didn't diminish or demean her in public, and she treated me with respect, but we locked the door a few times and had a debate or two about the need for a new football stadium. The point of that, I think, is you get to decide how you're going to disagree and how you're going to treat each other when you do disagree. And that's about respect. And again, coming back to the things our moms taught us, hopefully in the 2nd or 3rd grade. The other thing, and I'm going to back to moral imperative, like what, this is a quote. The most remarkable thing about our country is ordinary citizens controlled almost every major institution, public and private. Does this make sense? What it makes is a democracy. We, the people, govern ourselves. When you're driving home tonight and you're deciding whether I board you or not, think about that, because what you're doing here matters. And, you're all busy people. And sometimes you need to hear that. You got to be reminded of that, because there are kids who don't have a whole lot, who just made it through the pandemic, and you want them to have good teachers and resources and buildings and laptops and all of that to give them a better shot at whatever they want to do next in life. But that matters a lot. And so, again, if I do nothing else tonight here, I'm going to remind you that that matters and what you're doing matters. And again, I thought this quote from the book kind of captured that. All right, board's not doing well. I liked some of this. The work peaks before or after the election. And then people kind of go quiet until the next election, and then you'll see a lot of sort of hoopla about what the board is doing. They tend to cater to special interest groups, which, special interest groups is kind of a nebulous term in some ways. In some ways, it's pretty clear what it means, but I think there are normal special interest groups. I think band parents are a group. Football parents are a group. You have, high-performing kids who want to get into the AP classes. Their parents tend to think. So you have natural clusters within your world. But special interest groups, I think, are people who get all caught up that you're allegedly teaching things you're not teaching and that type of anger. Policy discussions tend to be a little superficial. Implementation tends to be a little weak, and lasting influence doesn't happen that often. I think right now you're at a point in the history of this district where you are pivoting to how this district thinks and operates. And I think you are having a lasting influence because, again, who you have hired and how you expect things to run right now are different than the night a couple of years ago, which I remember as my first really paying attention, was the night of the 3 nights of news coverage on the termination hearing. Good governance. Politics are really only talked about around the election cycle. You're paying attention to your core agenda. You're recognizing government is for everyone. Board effectively does long-term and short-term thinking. And you think a lot about not just passing a policy or the adoption of a policy, but how do you implement it? Because there's also a perfect world type of thinker who, oh, we should do this. Okay. Well, if we should do that, that means this for every single teacher and every single student, and here's the budget ramifications, and here's the policy ramifications. I call them magic wand thinkers. Oh, if you would just do this, I worked at Walmart for 13 years, and we had 4,500 stores at the time. And people, I heard this all the time. If you would just do this in the store. And I'll be like, okay, well, we got to do that 4,500 times. Someone said to me one night, well, you just should put a table down there with a couple of chairs and talk about health care. I'm okay, that's 4,500 tables. That's 9,000 chairs. That's 9,000 employees on duty just to do whatever. So, again, implementation is often more complex than people think. Board member mindset. Board members demonstrated an almost intuitive understanding about what it takes to be an effective board member. They understand that in order to be effective, all board members have to be leaders working towards the same goal. Your goal, I think, if I had to ad-lib it, you want to improve this district from what it has been in the past. You want to modernize this district. You want to accept and recognize that you have a lot of kids who come to school without a lot of support at home, or even enough to eat at home, let alone wireless for a second. And I think you do think like that. And I think your moral imperative is to make life better for those kids. And Dr. P has talked to me a lot about, you know, what's the average graduate looks like. And I think as we work our way through the long-term strategic plan, I think we'll be back to you to talk about more about that. But, you know, you take the average graduate, if they want to go to the military or to college or to two-year college, or if they want to go to a job right away, across recognizing that every single kid is different, you know, what can we do to better meet the needs of all those different kids in kind of a cohesive way? So, leading from the middle, I was on a board in Northwest Arkansas during COVID, and the fight over masks was brutal. We had 4 police officers at one meeting. I voted for masks that night, and I could hear the chanting from the parking lot with 3 TV stations, and I knew when they called the roll and they said Quinn, and I got ready to say yes, I knew I was going to lose my reelect at that moment. Moral imperative, I knew I could go home and look at my kids and wife and say, I voted for the safety of children tonight, and I knew darn well I had probably just guaranteed I would lose my seat. And I did. A year later, I wear that like a badge of pride, because in an ugly time, I did what I thought was best for children. And I'm not saying I'm the good guy. I'm just saying moral imperative, the nights that the vote matters, and the nights that the anger is real, that is where you really have to think through what you want to be. So, leading from the middle, what's the glue that holds the district together? Unity of purpose. A part of our moral imperative, all children can and should learn. And deep focus followed by constructive monitoring and action are critical to success. Again, things that I think are fundamentally a part of what you do, but sometimes we just need to sort of step back and think about it a little bit, which is hopefully what we're doing tonight.
Could I ask another question so that we all have the same idea? We say governance mindset.
Yeah.
Can you?
I would call governance mindset sort of taking all of this and thinking, stepping back and saying, how do we function? Like week to week, meeting to meeting, year to year, are we functioning in a way that we are pleased with? Are we holding the superintendent and his staff to a standard? And are they delivering on that standard? Are we doing an annual evaluation of your superintendent that makes sense? Are you, on January 1, do you know what you're going to judge him on December 30th? You know, because if it's a surprise, no one's doing it right. It should never be a surprise. So I think governance mindset is just all of these things taken together about sort of the way you're functioning and what you're projecting into the community. Maybe this is going to be a good slide to end tonight on, but I think it addresses some of this. When people are angry and times are tough, you know, reserve your judgment. Preconceived views don't help. There's a reason you have presentations in this meeting and discussions, because sometimes what something turns out to be is actually different than what you thought it was coming in. I think that's especially interesting for new board members who have to get a handle on sort of what's reality versus what they have heard as reality. Listen empathetically, get past individual behavior and listen to the story. I think empathetic listening my best friend on the school board, we're walking out of a meeting one night, and he said something that became my mantra. He said, and both of us were blessed. We did okay in life. We had bright kids. I'm not saying my kids were like 36 ACT kids, but we both had kids that we loved a lot, and they had support and resources at home. And he said to me, as we walked into the parking lot on a rainy night, he says, you know, we're not really on this board for our kids. Our kids are probably going to be fine. But we're on this board for kids who don't have a lot, which became kind of that was my listen empathetically moment. And later, as we would vote on the band taking a trip, I'm going to get in trouble for some of this. As we would vote on the band taking a trip to the band competition of America, that's not the name of it, I don't remember, in Indianapolis, the band program would say to the kid, hey, you got to go home and raise $1,200 a piece. And then the band director one night made the mistake in a meeting, and he did it right in front of me. He said, well, you know, they're going to sell wrapping paper or chocolate chip cookie dough. You remember this stuff.
Yes.
Oh. And I said, well, that's easy to say if the kid has wealthy grandparents who are going to buy a ton of wrapping paper, or if the kid has next door neighbors who are going to buy a ton of chocolate chip cookie dough. Or the new thing now is cheesecakes, by the way. I learned that just the other night. Cheesecakes. If the kid has a support system of people who are going to buy that, and then the parents are going to throw in and make up the difference, the kid's happily off to Indianapolis. What I started to realize, and I did become rather militant about this, that the kid who is taking the AP classes and probably headed to college tends to be the kid who's also in band, because if you're a kid that doesn't have a lot, you probably can't afford the clarinet or the trombone or the cheesecakes, right? So my empathetic listening became, I started to filter, okay, I would filter everything through, well, can all kids afford this? If we're going to do it that way? Because I really pushed back on the idea that we would have a school system within a school system. And you know that there are districts, everybody's proud of their AP kid who has a 34, right? We're going to brag about that kid who's going to Harvard, sure we are. Or the kid going to West Point or Annapolis. Good for us, let's brag about that. But my empathetic listening was, let's remember not all kids start the day the same. Focus on content, not behavior or style. Ignore rhetoric from angry people. I got 600 emails before the mask vote. I had to tell my wife and daughter, you got to stop reading the Facebook stuff. And my 22-year-old fierce daughter, who loves her dad, said, I'm about to start responding. And I said, no, you're not. And at the ugly end of it, I called home one day to my wife. I said, what's going on? And she said, those, And I knew exactly what she was talking about. I said, you and Ava need to stop reading that stuff. But they were savaging her dad and her husband, and it was hard, okay? I can laugh about it now. It wasn't that funny at the time. But in terms of tuning out angry people, sooner or later, you're going to have to tune out angry people. Buddy of mine on the school board had a great line when I came on the board. This before any kind of new guy training. I said, what's it like? And he had a line that stays with me. He said, well, 90% of the time it's 45 empty seats with 3 people here, including 2 staff. And 2 nights a year it's standing room only, which I thought was a great description of school board life. So 2 nights a year, but can you tune out the anger on the 2 nights a year with standing room only? Behavior. Be true to the norms of good board behavior. They matter more than ever during times of stress. I think you, in ways you don't know, if you walk in a school, if you walk into any event, oh, she's on the board, he's on the board, and people notice you. And again, that's part of moral imperative, it's part of who you are, it's part of being a community leader, which is not, being visible, you pay a little price for that. Don't take every difference personally. Stay grounded. You're never going to vote everything 7-0. Move forward, put it behind you after dealing with a divisive vote. Took me a while to learn that because I'm a feisty guy. My guy walking into the parking lot that night where he said that about all kids, he and I were on the end of a lot of 5-2 votes. Some of it was pretty divisive, but we both kind of stood for what we thought we believed in on a couple of issues where it would have been far easier to go with the flow. So I will close tonight saying no one who could come in here and speak to you tonight has more respect for what you do. I think you're moving in the right direction, and I think that's hard. And you took a culture where you guys were in the weeds a lot, and you came out of the weeds, and you said, you know what, we're gonna be the leaders. And I think, again, the curriculum clipping I put up, you had the guts to say, and then the long-term strategic plan, which we continue to work on, and the superintendent likes numbers, and we would add numbers. We had a lot of numbers. We still have a lot of numbers. But the willingness to put your numbers out there is to say, you know what, we're going to be honest about this in a way that most school boards and districts are still hesitant to do, because there still are the happy tellers in life who want to pretend that everything's just great. Well, look, because the football team is good does not mean the education is good. I'm gonna get lightning's gonna hit me. I'm saying that in Arkansas. But being truth tellers who have a moral core, I think you're changing what's going on here. And so with that, I'm going to stop at the 35-minute mark.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Joe, have you seen the education audit? Have you guys got together on that, Superintendent?
The curriculum management audit?
The curriculum on it, yeah. Have you
I
got
looked
a
at
chance
part of it.
Yeah. Because a lot of that really shows up as a result of what the other people are thinking around this district.
Yes, and that's right. And that I totally, I think I know what you mean. You've got stereotypes that are 30 years old, and it's hard to overcome 30 years of anything. And the curriculum, it's in there, yeah. When I first started consulting for the district, we did focus groups in this room. I'd take like 12 employees at a time. And one thing I really vividly remember, like people, longtime employees who were in the room would say, well, 25 years ago it was more of a family. And if someone didn't have a winter coat, like we would find him a winter coat. But then you grew to a district of 8,000 students, and the ability to find someone a winter coat gets more complicated. Plus, let's face it, when you and I were young, I mean, life was simpler. And whenever I'm assuming you and I are roughly the same age, but like I remember growing up, I have two brothers and a sister. We have a little joke. Like we can still, to this day, my family, we can remember the name of every family on the street. I have neighbors now. If my life depended on it, I could not tell you the family name, okay? But again, when you and I were young, there was this like sense of community. There was this sense of watching out for each other. And so I didn't discount what I heard in the focus group, but it was like, okay, but it's a harder thing now. But as a district, good for you guys for putting the curriculum, good for you guys for doing a curriculum audit, because that is a key piece of, are you getting kids ready to be judged at what comes next, and so they can be as competitive as possible.
I want to thank Mr. Steele for asking a question, because it's probably pretty transparent that I'm a new board member.
But you're asking the questions, and I think that's what matters.
Well, and I was just mentioning to Valerie, that Saturday we did cover a lot of information, especially the mission statement. Can you get her that? Have you seen that?
Absolutely.
Can you get her that information, and
Yeah.
that would be very helpful.
I'll get her the draft document from our June Saturday gathering, which kind of has the whole sort of thing, which is actually kind of an interesting document.
I watched it on Zoom.
I will
See,
get
you're
you.
better.
I will get you the June document and the current draft of the numbers, absolutely.
And also, Mr. Quinn, I was just going to add that when we just did our 2 town halls in October, we included all that. That's actually on our website. I'll share that with the board again. But that draft is there of the new vision, what Mr. Steele is referring to, moral imperative, the work we did that day to come together and dream about where we want our school system to be. And I couldn't be more proud of the work we did that day. And
She was online.
she was on Zoom.
I'm going to close with a funny story about new board members. This is a true story. We had Bentonville fought over a second high school. And underlying that was a belief that I'm going to get in trouble, that the football team would be diminished if you took a pool of talent to school A and a pool of talent to school B. So there was old timers, man. This idea of a second high school was just. But the guy on the board, he was elected, and then the next meeting's coming up, and he leaves work and he's running late, and he tells the story much funnier than I can. He's running late, but he realizes, oh God, the county clerk is about to close, and I'm not sworn in. Drives to the county courthouse, and he literally jogs up the stairs. Is this the county clerk's office? Yes. Okay. Can you swear me in as a board member? Because you can get sworn in the ceremonial at the board meeting. That doesn't count. But at the county clerk's office, he gets sworn in. It's now 4:30. They're like locking the door. He runs out, gets back in his car, drives to the school board meeting. And as he tells the story, an hour later, he had to cast a vote on a $65 million high school proposal that was being hotly debated. And he said to me later, and I think this was a great, he was like, okay, and he turned out to be the swing vote. It was a 4-3 vote, he was the swing vote.
Wow.
But he used to, I've never heard a better example of, and I just skipped ahead in my slides, I took this out of order, but that is what new board members face sometimes and the complexity of all of it. Thank you for having me here. I'm enjoying this. You're great. Keep asking questions.
I have a question also. Are you going to come back, since we stopped at discussion 2, are you going to come back and finish?
Yeah,
on
we're going to
another
finish
work?
this
Okay.
deck. And look, we instead of what we wanted to do was to make this conversational, so we didn't know how much I would get through in 30 or 45 minutes. So we said, well, let's do 45 minutes tonight, and let's come back at the next work session meeting and just continue this.
Okay.
But I also think if you're processing sort of what we're talking about the next time you're in a meeting or you're listening or you're picking up groceries and you're hearing from someone who's not happy, I think there's some stuff here that you can process and change your game a little bit. So
I think, this discussion has been good, and the information that you have presented and given to us, for the simple fact, if somebody that is listening out there that has an interest possibly to run and to feel that they are compelled for good reason to run, well, it was a good thing to know that for sure you're just one of several. But it's good information to have out there to kind of maybe put a fire under somebody that would like to
yes,
run.
yes. So let me pick on you.
Absolutely.
Why did you run?
I ran because, I have a passion for children, and I had children in the North Little Rock School District, and I saw the trend where it was kind of going educational-wise, and I felt that I could possibly bring a voice to some of those who were disenfranchised.
That's a great answer, by the way. You're concise, you're clear. I don't know you, but I heard your answer. Clearly she knows why she's here. And you had that answer in your head before you filed the papers to run.
Yes.
I think you just referenced people who don't think much about that before they file to run, and maybe may or may not. There's a fair number of resignations on school boards. People who it ends up not being quite what they thought, or they got into it for a different reason, or the guy who beat me a year ago with the chanting angry crowd outside, he served a year, he's done.
Wow.
Didn't run again.
Mr. Quinn,
Ms. Williams has a comment.
wonderful.
You what?
Now, I was just saying how wonderful you are.
If my wife, if I could tell my wife that,
Well, I'm the reason being the board. You know, like in church, they have revivals. Well, this board tonight, I feel it's like a revival. We need to hear.
well,
You know, come back in the fold and get motivated. You know, keep us alive and keep us focused on what we're really supposed to do.
and okay, now you just made my night. And you make
Minister
my night
Quinn.
asking questions and look, you know, but I'm also, and this is what the superintendent had in mind when he asked me to stay involved with you, is like I'm not in front of you asking for anything. And I've been a board member elsewhere, so I'm sort of objective, and I sort of can know what you're going through. So yeah, it's also a reminder. It's hard, and that's where I'm gonna. I know it's just hard, and so the revival part of me is reminding that in a world where a lot of crazy people are running for the wrong reasons, good, smart, normal, thoughtful people like you who care about this community, and you've cared about this community forever, that matters, okay? And if you need like an independent, like third party like me to come in here and remind you of that, I'm going to do that all day long. All right, I'm over time, so I'm going to put this down now. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Quinn.
Thank you. That's it. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go.